So today I'm going to go over different homeschool styles with you. So approaches, method, different types of homeschooling. Now, before we get started with the in-depth portion of this, I want to say that there is not necessarily a right or a wrong way to homeschool your kids. There are lots of different styles, and you're going to be taking into consideration your specific family, the children that you have, your environment, how many kids you have, your personal preferences as a parent, how you think your children learn best. And the second part of this is the method that you choose to homeschool your kids is not nearly as important as your children learning and your children's progression. So I want to offer this to you, that with learning, there are basically 3 different steps to learn something. One is that you acquire information. You bring in information in whatever way that is. Number 2 is you're going to utilize that information. You practice, you play, maybe you do a project where you learn, like you use the information that you've learned. And number 3 is you share the information in some way. So when you share something, you have to have internalized it to be able to share. So with that being said, my name is Jackie and I am the founder of HomeSchool ThinkTank and host of the HomeSchool ThinkTank parenting podcast and video channel. And I am a homeschooling consultant and I am a certified life coach and I help homeschooling parents. So if you want to learn more about my consulting and coaching services, check the article that goes with this video or podcast episode. And by the way, the article that goes with this episode has lots of different homeschool styles in it. And you'll find a sort of a quick summary of each of the styles of homeschooling. But then from that summary, you'll see a link that goes to a much more in-depth article about a specific homeschooling method. So if you want to learn more about a specific method, I probably have a video or a podcast episode about that method, and I most likely have an article that I have written all about that, and you'll find curriculum and different resources around all the methods basically, or almost all of them. So there might be a few I haven't done an article on yet, but I will be doing those at some point, so they will be there. And at the very least, there's lots of information for you. All right, so today's video, these are just a quick synopsis of the different styles of homeschooling. And if you want to learn more, be sure to check the article that goes with this and you'll see the link to that specific method. All right, so we're going to just sort of go in alphabetical order, honestly. The Charlotte Mason homeschooling method. With this method, you're going to hear a lot about living books. Now, all that means is that your child is reading a book that brings a topic to life. It's generally written by a singular author that is very knowledgeable about the topic, and it could be fiction or nonfiction, but it's like making the topic exciting instead of like the dry textbook. So with the Charlotte Mason method, you'll also see that there's a lot of study of nature and art and what I would sort of consider more of a liberal arts education. All right, number 2, a curriculum-based approach. Now, let me be clear, with all of these methods, a lot of them, it's not a singular method. Sometimes you're using a few different methods together. So, for example, with the Charlotte Mason method of homeschooling, you might use curriculum for this method. But when I'm talking about a curriculum-based approach, what I mean is you are using curriculum to teach your kids. There is another style of homeschooling that does not include curriculum, and we'll go over that here in a few minutes. But most parents start out with a curriculum-based approach. And the reason we do this is most of us have been brought up in the public education system where curriculum is used to teach specific subject areas. And it's what we're most comfortable with. So this is the way we tend to teach our children. Sometimes you might hear this called a traditional approach, but there are some little nuances with that I'll get to when I get to the traditional approach of homeschooling. The next thing is what you would call a child-led learning method, or self-directed, play-based, delight-direct, or other terms used. And by the way, you're going to see me looking at my notes from time to time because I want to be sure I don't forget anything. So basically, with a child-led learning approach, your child is leading the way. So if they're interested in, I'll use my own daughter for example, she was always very interested in reptiles, snakes. So I nurtured that interest by taking her to the library, and she would check out books on it, and taking her to museums with reptiles, and eventually getting her own reptiles. And, you know, she started like a YouTube channel and a website and things like that around that interest. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use a curriculum-based approach as well, where you're also integrating what you think as a parent needs to be done, but you're also nurturing this child-led learning approach as well. So like I said, a lot of these methods you can use in conjunction with one another. The next thing is a classical education homeschooling method. So a classical education uses a combination of the 7 liberal arts and a study of the great books. So I would encourage you, this is a very rigorous curriculum-based approach. Definitely check out the article that goes with this around homeschool styles, and you'll see that. There's so much I could go into here, but check out that article. But you're really reading all the classics. And the great books are like the Western classics. But there are people who are adjusting that a little bit to include more of a worldly approach so that even Eastern books could be included. Again, go ahead and check that article out. There's a lot there. Okay, so a concept-based learning approach. When I talk about a concept-based approach, let's say you're teaching your child how to add and you're using curriculum. At the end of the day, we're not teaching curriculum. We're teaching our child how to add. So when the curriculum isn't working, and I'm going to tell you, no curriculum is perfect because it wasn't created for your specific child. Curriculum is created for the masses, for what works for many kids. Oftentimes with curriculum, an individual actually sort of created it for their child and then realized it was very effective and then ends up sharing it with others. Or sometimes with larger companies, there is a team that creates curriculum around a subject. But with concept-based learning, we're focusing on the concept. So you might be teaching addition out of a curriculum, but if your kid's not getting it, then we're going to supplement with games and maybe stories that have math in them, that have your child thinking about problem solving and what this really means, and they're implementing it. So we're focusing on the concept. Here's another example with that. When my oldest was learning how to read, we were using a curriculum, and actually with this specific curriculum, I had the same problem with both my kids at about the same point. So I think there's a deficiency in the curriculum because of that. But overall, it still was really good and it helped my kids read. But around lesson 30, I'm thinking it was, I had to pause the curriculum and we just went and read real books because they weren't progressing. They needed time to practice. Now, my focus wasn't finishing the curriculum. My focus, well, it sort of was, but it shouldn't have been. My focus was teaching my children to read. So that's the concept, teaching them to read, not finishing the curriculum. And honestly, if I had it to do again, I would not go back to that curriculum. I would have just continued with reading books. But I did. We did curriculum, read books, went back to the curriculum and continued to read books, but really there was no point in going back to the curriculum. We should have just kept reading books. That was the purpose of the curriculum, was to teach them to read. All right, so focusing on the concept, I suggest that you always incorporate concept-based learning in your homeschool. Always remember, it's about your child progressing and learning, not about finishing curriculum. Okay, the next thing, deschooling. Now, deschooling is not actually a style of homeschooling, but I included it here because it's a term that a lot of parents hear and they wonder about. What deschooling is about is, if your child has been in school, what happens when they're in school is they are very much indoctrinated into, we wake up at this time, we go to school, we wait to be told what to learn, we're going to learn this, 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 and this, now we're going to go to recess or lunch. Like, your kids are literally trained to wait to be told what to learn. So deschooling is literally about giving your kids, and honestly as a parent, you need to deschool too, a break. Before, it's like this transition time between going to school and homeschooling, because your goal here is for your child to quit waiting to be told what to do and what to learn, and to take some initiative and develop curiosity and pursue that curiosity and become inquisitive and want to learn on their own. And honestly, you're going to have to let your kids go through some boredom. They're going to have to get bored and not be picking up phones and just turning to electronics. Like, I really think when you deschool, we all tend to do what's called buffering. When we're bored, we might pick something up to do. And in this day and age, it's electronics. So if you can have times where your kids are literally not allowed to touch the electronics, they're going to get bored enough to do something else, to play a game or to read books or write or do an art project. This is what deschooling is about, is basically getting bored enough to learn on your own, because you've got to do something with your time. And that's what really ultimately helps the child develop a level of learning, is their own curiosity. Okay, the next thing is called an eclectic method of homeschooling. And this is basically combining lots of different styles of homeschooling. Some people are very much eclectic on purpose, but I really think ultimately we're all a bit of an eclectic homeschoolers, because even if you use a curriculum-based approach, you're probably playing games with your kids too. You're probably doing field trips, other things like that. I'm going to touch on something real quick. I don't have in the article at the time of this recording, but I will add it. Experiential learning, if you hear this term, that's really about experiencing things to learn. So, for example, a few years ago, we took our kids to like Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. So we went and, saw the geyser and Old Faithful and went to lakes and saw wildlife things. And then you might, ahead of time or when you get home, follow up on these things to learn more. I remember at the Museum of the Rockies, there was a Viking exhibit. And so that might prompt you to learn more about the Vikings. So experiential learning is literally getting out in the world, having field trips, going on vacations where education is like a core component of the vacation, and you're learning from your experiences, and doing projects too, like with other people too. That can be an experience. All right, the next one, a game schooling approach. Basically, you're using games for your kids to learn. And if you're really intentional about this, there are games about pretty much everything. And you can learn almost anything through games, I think. But I do have to say, I think sometimes there is value in a more curriculum-based approach to some things. But again, even if you don't use games solely as the way that you homeschool, I would suggest that you always include games no matter how you homeschool your kids. The next method of homeschooling is the Montessori method, named after Maria Montessori. And this is a child-led approach, but within a structured environment. And it definitely hinges a lot on hands-on learning. So again, check the article that goes with this video and you will find more information about Maria Montessori's method of homeschooling. All right, the next thing is nature schooling. Some people might call this outdoor learning. There are some other terms around it, wild schooling or forest schooling or earth schooling, but they all have in common that you are out in nature a lot. In some areas, you might not have the option so much for like wild nature, but like where I live, the mountains are very close. There's actually a desert area very close too, where you literally could pretty much be out in nature every day, schooling and learning. This is definitely, you're really focusing on teaching your kids appreciation of the environment. I honestly don't know of anybody that nature schools fully, but again, you might want to incorporate elements of nature schooling into your homeschool. So, you know, you might choose one day every week, almost regardless of the weather. Obviously, you want to keep your children's safety in mind, but part of nature schooling is really even survival skills, being able to just know how to dress and know how to take care of yourself in any weather. So this is definitely an interesting approach. There's also a term called forest schooling, where literally there are forest schools, and this is pretty common with preschool and especially in the UK, where it's all outdoor. I don't know. Everybody has their own opinions on that. I think that might be a little extreme to be all outdoors with a 4-year-old all day, but to each their own, I suppose. Okay, so the next thing I want to touch on is online public or virtual school. Now, I want to say this is not homeschooling at all, but many parents are led to believe that this is homeschooling by the public education system. Again, it is not. Generally speaking, as a homeschooler, you have to like register as a homeschooler, and you have to let the government know basically that you're homeschooling your kids. Now, the rules and regulations vary state by state and country by country. But a lot of times these online public schools are called K-12 programs. There is a tremendous difference between what I call true homeschooling and doing public school online. With true homeschooling, you have choices around how you're going to educate your child, the style you use, the curriculum you use, whether you use curriculum or not. Your schedule is yours to own. When your child is in a K-12 online public school, you're basically told what time your child needs to be online. You're told exactly what curriculum to use. You are still in public school. And I'm gonna just add this as a quick little note. The Credo study. According to the Credo study, this is before COVID. If you were to group all the online public schools together as like one district, they would be among the worst performing schools in America. Now, certainly it's probably improved some, but I don't really know. And that study was done by the Walton Family Foundation, Sam Walton that owns Walmart, right? And I know he's passed away, but, and the reason they did that study is because they give a lot of money to education and they want to know where their money is going and whether it's doing any good or not. And it really was not doing a lot of good with those online public schools. So take that into consideration. I'm also going to address another term right quick. And I personally coined this term shortly after COVID started. And I call it true homeschooling. And the reason I coined that term is because so many parents were and families were calling themselves homeschoolers, and teachers were saying we're homeschooling, and everybody was calling it homeschooling, but they were doing public school at home. And it wasn't the K-12 program. It was a forced situation, right? Where we're not in the brick and mortar buildings anymore. We're at home doing school. And it really bothered me because it's not homeschooling. And part of the reason it bothered me so much is so many parents were hating homeschooling in quotes, but they weren't homeschooling at all. They had no clue what homeschooling really looks like, and they didn't realize that the biggest difference between like that forced experiment really and true homeschooling is choice. When you're actually homeschooling your kids, you have a choice. You could put them in school. And responsibility. You are ultimately responsible for your child's education. And again, choice in like curriculum, styles of homeschooling. What hours are we doing school? Because in most places, it's not, the law doesn't dictate what hours you have to do school. It's mostly around how many days in a year and how many hours in those quote unquote school days. So just know I coined that term because really homeschooling is actually a legal, like the word homeschooling is a legal designation as to how you're homeschooling your child. So take that into account as you use the word homeschooling. Okay, the next thing I want to mention to you, I'm going to go a little out of order from my blog post, unit studies. I'm going to start with that. Unit studies is basically taking a topic, let's say the ocean, and you and your children are going to study the ocean, but within that topic, you're bringing in history and spelling and reading and math and all the different required subject areas and others that you might find appropriate. And you're intentionally incorporating those subject areas into the study of whatever unit, whether it's the solar system, an era in history, just whatever it is. And you're intentionally bringing these subject areas in. But here's what happens with a unit study is your brain has, these synapses, all these connections. And when you're tying it all together around this one unit, your children are going to remember more and actually learn more. Now, the next term I want to bring up is project-based learning. And this is similar, but not the same as unit studies. With project-based learning, a lot of times you're actually utilizing information you already have in your brain to do a project, but you also are going to be learning while you're doing that project. But the biggest difference between project-based learning, sometimes called PBL, or project-based homeschooling is what some homeschoolers call it, but project-based learning is truly its own terminology. The biggest difference is there will be a public product when you're done. So let's say your child loves horses and they decide to do a website about horses. That's going to be a public product, right? Or they decide to, even a young child, they are going to write their own book and self-publish it on Amazon. That would be a product. And they could literally do that. As if they can draw or write, they can do that, right? And that would be a product. Or maybe you create a social media account to share things that you're learning about a certain topic. Maybe your child is really into dog training. And so you're going to be teaching others about dog training on this social media account and also sharing what you're learning, what you're doing with your dogs. So project-based learning has a public product. Okay, the next term is relaxed homeschooling. I think different people interpret relaxed homeschooling a little bit differently. Here's my interpretation. So let's say you sort of have a curriculum-based approach and maybe you do math around this time every day and then reading and then grammar, different subject areas. As a relaxed homeschooler, you're relaxed. It's like, okay, most of the time we're going to do this. And I was very much like this when my kids were younger, like, here's your curriculum, but on Wednesdays we have this park day with other homeschoolers, so we're leaving out the afternoon stuff. Once in a while there's a field trip, so we're not going to worry about it on those days. That's our homeschooling that day. And honestly, in the very, very beginning, I tried to do it all, and that is the quickest way to burn out. I recommend that every homeschooler be a relaxed homeschooler, because if you are so hell-bent on doing everything you have planned at exactly the right time, you're going to drive yourself nuts. And you're going to send your kids back to school most likely, because it's like impossible, really. You are, unlike a public school where they have somebody making lunch for your kids and possibly breakfast, and your kids go to recess and somebody else is watching them. As a homeschooling parent, you are home with your kids day in and day out. You're generally doing the housekeeping, all the medical appointments for your family, haircuts, purchasing clothing, housekeeping. You're like doing it all, and you're homeschooling your kids. So if you can bring in sort of an attitude of, on the days we're home, when we don't have other things that are, because you have real life, here's what we're doing. But if there's a field trip, we're not going to stress it and try to cram everything into a day. We're going to do what we can before the field trip or after the field trip, but then we're going to go on the field trip and we're going to bump that stuff to the next day that we didn't do. Honestly, I think we'll talk another day about homeschooling schedules. I think year-round schooling is really a great option for homeschoolers, and it goes really well with relaxed homeschooling, because in reality, I found that there's just enough of life cropping up that it just works better to just go year-round, and your kids, honestly, it gives them more to do in the summer too. 2 or 3 days a week, they can do a little bit of school. It can be a more relaxed schedule in the summer, right? So have your curriculum or whatever method you use of homeschooling, but be willing to be flexible and allow for life. And you're going to be a happier homeschooling parent, I'm telling you. All right, the next method of homeschooling, and I'm going to talk about 2 methods together here: Roadschooling and Worldschooling. So Roadschooling is just what it sounds like. You are literally traveling, you're hitting the road with your kids. Generally, when people are talking about Roadschooling, they're talking about more of an RV-based lifestyle. They are talking more about literally traveling by road. We're not generally crossing oceans, right? Now, world schoolers are maybe going to different continents. They are crossing oceans at times, going to different countries. Now, within those styles of homeschooling, of traveling while you're homeschooling your kids, you can use that just experiential learning, and that's the way you homeschool. But you might be like, some people, like unschoolers, will say we unschool for everything but reading and math. You might do that as a road schooler or world schooler. But you can incorporate, you could be a road schooler or a world schooler and incorporate Charlotte Mason, Montessori. You could be an unschooler. You could do a classical based method of education. You're probably going to be more of a relaxed homeschooler as a road schooler or world schooler. And this is what I mean. Oftentimes you're integrating different styles, if you will, and learning like homeschooling styles, but also learning teaching education styles into your own way of doing things. All right, the next thing is strewing. I don't know that I really consider this a homeschooling method, but it is a term that is commonly used in the homeschooling world. So strewing basically means you leave things out and about with the intention of your children picking them up and learning. So you might leave like brain teaser kind of games out, books out, other games, nature type things. I don't know, pine cones, rocks, sticks, something like that, for younger kids, where maybe they'll end up doing an art project or making patterns out of those objects, or reading the book or playing the game. But you're intentionally sort of setting things out and about, maybe a worksheet with addition problems, but you're not necessarily telling your child you're going to go do this. One great way to use strewing, especially if you have younger kids, is to set things out in the evening, and your kids could literally know that it's like you could leave something out on the coffee table every morning for them, or the kitchen table, and that could be the way they start their day, and it might give you a chance as a parent to like take a shower while your kids are busy. They've got something to do. So you could actually have a routine of strewing with your kids, but more often parents are just leaving things out, hoping that their kids will pick the things up and learn from them. All right, the next, I'm not going to really call it a style of homeschooling, it's more a style of learning and teaching, is a teacher-led learning model or direct instruction. This is in opposition really to child-led learning. Now, you can use both techniques within your homeschool, but a teacher-led learning model is really what it sounds like. Picture the public school system, teacher standing at the front of the class, teaching the children, this is what you're going to do today, and imparting lessons upon them. So with a teacher-led learning model, the kids are really looking to you for their education, as opposed to looking within with a child-led learning model where they're like actually curious and wanting to learn on their own. So I do think there's a place for both things in your life though. All right, the next thing I sort of touched on earlier, but I want to go more in depth on it here. Traditional homeschooling. So with traditional homeschooling, you're using a curriculum-based approach, but I actually expand this beyond that because lots of homeschoolers use a curriculum-based approach. When I first started homeschooling my kids, I definitely was using a traditional homeschooling approach, even though I really wanted to unschool, but I didn't have the guts to do it. A traditional homeschooling approach looks like this, in my opinion. We're going to get up at 6:30 and get ready for the day. We're sitting down at the kitchen table or wherever you do school to do, quote unquote, do our school. We're going to do math from 8 to 9. Then from 9 to 9:15, you're going to have a break. Now from 9:15 to 10:15, we're going to do the next subject. And then at 10:15, you're going to have a recess and a snack. You get 45 minutes. And then at 11:15, we're going to do this. And we're going to follow the public school calendar where we live. So we do school the same days as the public school does. We have the same days off. We're very much in alignment with what is happening in the public school system. That is what I consider traditional homeschooling. And you're probably using more of a teacher-led approach than a child-led learning approach. So that's what I mean by traditional homeschooling. I want to remind you again, there are articles that go more in depth for almost all of the styles of homeschooling that I'm covering here. All right, the next approach that I'm going to add for today is unschooling. Now, there are two different types of unschoolers. Most people will just call themselves unschoolers. Others will call themselves radical unschoolers. So I'm going to separate this a little more, and I tend to think of it more like intentional unschoolers and radical unschoolers. So as an intentional unschooler, here's how I would look at this. We're not using curriculum to learn unless your child requests it or wants it. And you could even provide it, but they're not required to do it, right? So as an intentional unschooler, here's how your day might look. Your kids wake up, maybe you have strewing some things about for them, so you're using that strewing method within unschooling, and they get up and do whatever you set out for the day. And then you have breakfast as a family. And then after breakfast, the kids go outside to play for a while. And then they come in, they have a snack. And after that, maybe you play a game together. And then after that, you might have lunch. And then after that, they come in for a reading time. And you read as a family, or if your kids are older, everybody may be reading on their own. And then maybe you do a science experiment, or you're studying a certain era in history. You could actually even incorporate a unit study into sort of an intentional unschooler. And then after that, maybe you go on a field trip, or you get out of the house for the day. And then maybe in the evening, you're watching a documentary around a certain history time frame. But you get the point. So there's some structure to your day. Your kids still get up, they still go to bed at certain times. You sort of have this structure with meal times and whatnot. And you're making sure that your kids are still learning some things, but there's time in their day for them to do their own thing, and sort of study what they're interested in. So even where I mentioned a unit study, maybe it's more like self-learning time, right? But then there are radical unschoolers. Radical unschoolers, their kids are completely in charge of their learning. The parents, in my opinion, with that, they may be strewing things and putting things out, but it is like completely unregulated. If the kid wants to read all day long, they can read all day long. If they don't read anything that day, they don't read anything that day. If they want to play video games all day, they can play video games all day. It's really just, there's not structure there. That's my understanding of radical unschooling. And some parents think that's a great route. I don't necessarily think that's the best way to go, but you know what? There are successful homeschoolers from every style of homeschooling, and there are people who have failed from every style. So the style you choose is not going to be what makes you successful or unsuccessful as a homeschooler. It's more about making sure that your kids are learning and that they're progressing, and that you're meeting your state or your country's homeschooling requirements. That's really what creates a successful homeschooler there. So there are some other things I think around that too. So definitely check out homeschoolthinktank.com. Visit our website. The URL that goes with this video is homeschoolthinktank.com/homeschool-styles with a slash at the end. All right, so I hope that you found this video, this podcast episode, super helpful. Again, I have only touched on each of these styles of homeschooling, each of these approaches to education and learning. Definitely check the article that goes with this episode, and you can learn more about all of the styles of homeschooling. I have so much information on the website to help you. Now, also, when you need help with homeschooling, contact me. Go to homeschoolthinktank.com and you can learn how you can schedule a call with me and get individual coaching, or join our homeschool parenting group called Thrive. All right, I can't wait to meet you. Live and learn your way. My name is Jackie, and I am your host of the Homeschool Think Tank Parenting Podcast. Bye-bye.